Thank you. White House Economic Advisor Jared Bernstein joins me now. Jared, thank you so much for coming on. We very much appreciate it. Instead of, as Peter was talking about, trying to redefine recession, why not just acknowledge that most Americans are having a hard time and commit to fixing it?
Yeah, when the president talks about inflation, he very much is speaking in that spirit. He talks about the current inflation as unacceptably high. He talks about that as his #1 domestic priority. And trust me when I tell you that he dispatches his team to do all we can to help. And there's areas of the economy where we've actually seen some improvement, some health, but we have to do much more. Of course, gas prices are now down about 77 cents per gallon. Now, if you're a family with a couple of drivers, that can amount to 80 bucks a month in savings. If you aggregate that up across families, it's about $270 million per day. It's not a victory lap, let's be clear. We've got to do much more. But one part of that decline in the gas price, it's a global price, there's a lot that goes into it, has to do with this president's release of oil from the strategic reserve. So we want to be clear that we're doing all we can. Many other measures, including some that are on the legislative docket that can help.
We should note that release of the supply is arguable. Going back to inflation, as Peter Ducey was saying, the White House is now saying that inflation is too high, that we got to get inflation under control. But boy, when it first started a year plus ago, inflation wasn't too high. Inflation wasn't real. It was transitory. So what's to stop the White House 3 or 4 months from now from saying, you know what, boy, this recession thing really was real, and it's killing Americans? That's the whole point that people are trying to make is now you're saying recession isn't really happening, but then you said inflation wasn't really happening, and now it's too high.
So look, no one ever said inflation wasn't really happening. So I think you need to be
transitory, which means it's
very different. Exactly. So you have to be a lot more careful about how you're teeing this up. In fact, if you go back to January or February when we first got here, we talked about the fact that the American Rescue Plan was going to bring a little more heat back into this economy. Now, yes, we talked about inflation as something that we thought would be shorter lived than it has been, and that's in no small part because we certainly didn't see variants of the virus that are out there, and we certainly didn't see Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Now, if you look at today's inflation numbers, or if you look at the last CPI, you will see that about half of the increase in inflation is gas and food prices. Now, that relates directly to Putin's invasion. None of that means that we can sit here and just explain this. We have to do all we can to help. But to say this White House hasn't been emphasizing the challenge to families from elevated prices is just completely inaccurate.
What the American people see is the White House kind of pointing fingers, right? And it goes back to the old adage that you do not need a thermometer to walk outside and know that it is hot. And what we're saying is that there's this pattern with the White House that inflation wasn't really genuine. It was transitory, that gas prices were first the oil company's fault, and then they were Putin's fault, and then they were the gas station owner's fault. It's this finger pointing. What I'm saying is maybe it's time, because it hasn't helped in the polls, to really take ownership of these things and then try to solve them. Is that a fair assessment?
So we've done exactly that. So when the president says inflation is unacceptably high and it's my #1 domestic priority, he is telling his team, of which I'm a member, to do everything we can. So let's talk about what we've done and what we're doing. Months ago, we began to try to work at the ports, particularly Long Beach and LA, to increase the speed at which goods were getting from ship to shelf. That throughput now is just about back to where it was pre-pandemic. We helped to pass an ocean shipping bill that took down the price of ocean shipping by about 11% over the past month. I've already talked about our interventions in the oil space in terms of gas. Now we have a bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, that will directly reduce family budgets when it comes to prescription drugs and health care premiums, as well as the purchase of clean energy goods and services. So, for example, electric vehicles. So I think it's, again, wholly inaccurate to dismiss the actions that we've taken. Now, the Fed is the first and foremost inflation fighter.
It's not the
but
actions,
we
sir. It's the
have also been
explanations the White
consistently
House
taking
continues to
actions
give.
to make a real difference in this space.
Right, but the people aren't feeling the actions. The people in some parts of the country are hurting, and they're not feeling the actions, which is why the president's approval rating is so low, which is why pessimism about the economy is so high, is they're not feeling the actions, and they feel a lot of finger pointing. I want to put this up because this is from a chief economist at Goldman Sachs, saying the following: while GDP declined for the second consecutive quarter, the official definition of a recession is a judgmental mix of levels and rates of change across several variables, most of which continued to expand in the first half of the year. It is that kind of gobbledygook, and you can see why people are so frustrated. Your final thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think that the confusion that kind of conversation generates is problematic, and it's one of the things that we've tried to come out against by talking about what really matters to this president is not what you label this or that economy, it's how families are doing. And that's why he is fighting as hard as he can to ease price pressures in all the ways I've elaborated. Now, I want you to do me one favor. You've got microphones. Go ask people how they feel about a 70-plus cent per gallon decline in gas prices across this country. Ask them if that's helped them at all. Ask them if that's a bit of breathing room.
But the fact that everything else is so high is killing them. That's the whole point. Is this more money is going out than is coming in?
We're not taking a victory lap. Our work is not done. But please do not dismiss the work that we've done thus far and the actions that we've taken thus far to help the American people deal with these elevated price pressures. It is a big mistake on your part to dismiss the actions we've taken.
December 19th of 2000, President Clinton was asked about inflation or recession.
I want you to talk about the ports. I want you to talk about gas prices. I want you to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. I want you to talk about what this White House is trying to do to help American families deal with these price pressures, okay?
Jared Bernstein, thank you, sir, for coming on. We very much appreciate your time.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.